Good morning, everyone. As was just mentioned, I'm chair of the Transport Planning Society. I'm just wondering, I know we've got a lot of transport geeks in the room. Have we got any Transport Planning Society members? Oh, yeah, quite a few. It would be fab if some more of you in the room want to join. Do come and have a chat with me. I'll be over on the steer stand for most of the day. It would be lovely to have some of you as members of TPS. I'm delighted to chair this panel this morning. It's great to be here this morning with so many of you and to see such a full room. We have mayors and leaders from 3 regions with very distinct identities. We've got David Scaife, the mayor from York and North Yorkshire. We've got Steve Rotherham, who won't need any introduction, I don't think, the mayor from Liverpool City region. And we're joined in place of Richard Parker today by Sandeep Sangadia, who's the Executive Director for Transport at TfWM. And thank you for standing in at very short notice, Sandeep. We really appreciate it. So I'm just going to say a few words before I open up for the panel conversation. I think we all know that transport is something that affects everybody. And we were just talking behind the scenes about how much time all of the mayors spend talking about transport, because it really does affect all of our lives in so many ways. It shapes how we access jobs, education, healthcare, green space and culture. And when it works well, we barely notice it. But when things go wrong, it impacts all of our lives in such a major way. And as we all know in the room, integrated transport is about far more than simply joining up modes. It's about creating a single coherent system where services connect, where ticketing is simple and fair, where information is reliable, and where the whole experience feels joined up from end to end. And I think public expectations have really shifted. People are really looking for seamless journeys. They want an alternative to the car that's predictable, affordable, and easy to use. And they want networks that really reflect modern patterns of living and working, and not just about the 9-to-5 commute that maybe is how we used to think about transport planning. So I just want to touch very briefly on some of the areas that transport can really influence. The first one that I think is massively important is social equity. Transport directly shapes all of our life chances, and poor connectivity can really deepen inequalities. And this will look really different in the 3 regions that we're talking about today, from the deprivation we see in some of our urban areas to the challenges of connecting remote rural and coastal communities that places like North Yorkshire face. But the principle is always the same. Without reliable and affordable connections, people are cut off from training, from work, and from social networks, and from those essential services that allow us to live good lives. And transport's also a huge economic catalyst. And good transport can be one of the major drivers of economic development. Reliable integrated networks attract investment, they help businesses to grow, and they support supply chains and freight movement. And they connect workers to sectors, so it's crucial that we have well-functioning transport systems to support our economy. And of course, transport is absolutely central to meeting our environmental ambitions. If we're going to meet our climate commitments, we must transform the way that people travel and access opportunities. And transport remains one of the most challenging sectors to decarbonise. And we're going to have to all act collectively to make public transport cleaner, more frequent and more attractive, and to decarbonise all forms of road and rail transport. And of course, we need to look at how we can make active travel the natural choice. So that's going to mean planning transport in a much more systems way. We need to plan transport effectively with land use. And as we're all thinking about how we deliver new housing and growth, that's going to be absolutely central. So all of this really depends on leadership. And our panel today is going to really look at how local leadership can drive change and really create those integrated transport systems. And Devolution gives mayors the ability to design systems that really reflect local priorities and the local needs of their communities, whether that's bus franchising, rail investment, rural mobility, or multimodal integration. And today's panel brings together leaders at the forefront of making that change happen, each with their own unique focus, but all aiming for a transport system that enables better lives, cleaner growth, and more prosperous communities. So I'll introduce our mayors in a minute and leaders in a minute. But I just want us all to be thinking as we go through this conversation about integrated transport, not as an end in itself, but as a lever for economic opportunity, for fairness and inclusion, and for environmental progress. And ultimately for making all of our lives better and enabling us to reach all the opportunities that we need to live good lives. So I'm going to go and join our panellists now, and I'm going to ask them each to talk about what integrated transport means for them and for their region, and what the most important outcomes of an integrated transport system will be for your people and businesses, and how do you want that transport system to feel in the next 5 years. So I'm going to start by opening up for David Scape, and I'll come and join you, the panellist. Over to you, David.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me today. I think it's the first time I've ever been to Manchester. It's not been grey and chucking down with rain, so excellent to be here. So, yeah, so for us in York and North Yorkshire, we have to look at what our region is, and frankly, it's a huge geographical area with a massive amount of urban, rural and coastal. We are the first combined authority that really represents all those three areas. So delivering a transport system for us is very different how it's been done with Steve or in Manchester and elsewhere. So we really class ourselves as the first of the next generation, the first of the next regions coming through about how we can join up our towns and our cities and our coastal areas. The challenge we have is we don't have that density of population. Outside of York, transport can work pretty well and does work pretty well, but joining up our rural communities and our coastal areas is a really big challenge. That said, everything that we're looking to deliver on, improving the affordability of homes, delivering on the homes, developing and growing our local economy, giving people great opportunity, transport underpins all of it, which is why we are, frankly, starting at a very low base in terms of the amount of miles driven by buses in North Yorkshire has halved over the last 10 years. Both local authorities, when I came in, were ranked 1 out of 4 with Active Travel England. So we weren't delivering on a huge amount overly well, and there hadn't been a huge amount of rail investment into York and North Yorkshire for quite some time either. Now, I have limited amounts of budgets compared to this guy here, but we are trying to make the best of what we can, which is why we are really exploring about where we do have powers, control and spend, i.e. active travel, for example. We're having a huge focus on that. We are working incredibly hard with both local authorities to improve that bus operation, and we've now been part of Northern Powerhouse Rail, and York, I would class, is basically the centre of the north when it comes to train connectivity. You've got 2-hour trains to London from York and Selby, connectivity over to this side of the Pennines. If you ever do want to come over to this Pennines, then that's improving as well. But also for us, heading up to the north and the northeast, up into Scotland, we're 2 hours from Edinburgh. So York really is the epicentre of that. Our job now is to make sure that people can move around the region. We make the place feel smaller by improving that connectivity, and all those elements of active travel, of bus, of rail, and frankly the car as well is a really important part of this, are all joined up, which they haven't been, and we've got an opportunity to actually do that now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Steve Rotherham, tell us all about your priorities in Liverpool City region.
Well, I mean, the manifold, because we've got the intercity stuff and then you've got the intra-city stuff, and obviously there's Liverpool-Manchester Rail Board trying to see whether we can connect the two great cities of the north together, who were the birthplace of the modern railway system, and you know, the time that it takes you to get from Liverpool to Manchester is not far off what it took the Rocket 100 and whatever it was years ago. So we have to do more about enabling those cities which have got economic growth to really be able to link better together. And I suppose that's what integrated transport's about the linkage between the different forms. And we've got different modes in our city region than most, because I don't think Manchester's got a ferry, but Liverpool has. It's across the Mersey. We've also got buses and trains, but we want to introduce a rapid transit system. And that's because we need to encourage more people out of the car. In the introduction, there was quite rightly an emphasis on the existential threat of climate change. We all need to do our little bits to address what we can do in our city regions. And that's where Devolution really helps us, because we've bought electric buses. And if there's anyone here from National Grid, if you could give us some better electricity supply, we'd buy even more electric buses from British manufacturers. So it's about the whole system. But for us, when we look at, for instance, Merseyrail, which is our train operator, I think it's the best performing in the country. And that's because it's a devolved system. And we've invested £500 million into brand new trains, the most accessible in the country and the most sophisticated because they've got battery technology. But the reason that we did that is because 100,000 journeys are made every day on the train, and 82% of our journeys are made by bus. So we're doing the easier bit first, if you like, and then we're taking back control of our buses. So we want our public transport system to work in the interests of the public, despite, I have to say, we've had a Reeve and Stagecoach, and we've been well served by them. So there's an ideological side of me that says I'd like to take these back into public control because that's what I believe in. But I actually think that we're taking them back into public control for the right reasons, and that is that we want to pull these bits together so that, for instance, trains turn up a few minutes before the train leaves and not a couple of minutes afterwards. And we can regulate that timetable through an integrated public transport system that really is in the interests of the passengers who use it. So in our city region, we're well advanced on franchising. First part of that is in September, second part next year. By the end of next year, that'll come back into full public control. The rail system, Merseyrail, we will be taking that back in 2028 under full public ownership and control. So you can start then to really do things that address the needs of communities and help the economic growth in the Liverpool City region, which I have to say, sadly, is second only to where I currently am situated.
So it's about taking those levers of control to be able to really integrate the transport system you have. That's fantastic. So West Midlands has been at the forefront of devolution in this country. Sandeep, do you want to tell us a bit about your vision for integrated transport in the West Midlands?
Thanks, Nicola. And apologies again if you were expecting to see Richard here and listen to Richard speak this morning. Sorry, you're stuck with me. But hopefully I can still take part in this excellent panel discussion. So for us in the West Midlands, there's been a big focus around our priorities, and journeys for everyone has been a big part of what we want to do. And that cuts across a whole range of things when it comes to an integrated transport system. Now, for us, a single seamless system across a multi-centre region. For the West Midlands has 3 cities, 4 towns, a population of about 3 million people, and some very big pan-regional connectivity aspirations as well. That needs to be supported by a network that does what it needs to do. So particularly around bus, and the work we're doing around bus franchising will be a big part of that integration. Now, as Steve has already said, buses are biggest share of public transport by a long shot. 80% of all public transport journeys in the West Midlands are made by bus, so that's the absolute backbone of our system, and that needs to work in a way that joins up the right journeys for our communities, our businesses, our visitors, and our residents. And it's important to look at it in the context of how does that work alongside greater control. So we're moving into a position, a very opportune position, where we are starting to take more control and ownership of our public transport networks. We own and operate our light rail system, so we can work around how that integrates effectively. We'll be moving towards bus over the next 18 months. We need greater accountability at national level on rail, so how do we make sure the rail system can be part of it? And then what are we doing locally around things like our spatial development strategy, where we can start to align housing, infrastructure, jobs, transport in the right way to make sure it all comes together. Now, that needs to be underpinned by improvements to the system. There's a significant amount of investment going on across transport. We've got 2.4 billion that will be invested over the next 5 years from 2027 to 2032. But how do we make sure we're investing in the right things at the right time to support those broader objectives that we want to see? And again, the work we've been doing recently around fundamentally changing the way we develop that infrastructure pipeline through the work we've done with Bridget Rosewell recently really helps to shape a different way of building that infrastructure to support the needs of businesses and residents. The final bit I just want to bring into all of that is making sure that we have capacity and capability in the system. And we all talk about having an integrated transport system, but have we got enough people to actually build the system and operate it in the right way? So how do we make sure we can bring the local people trained to build the system we need? And there's been a big push around our £75 million construction skills programme to help build those future homes, the railway stations, the light rail lines, the clean energy that we need to make sure all of that transport system can work in an integrated way.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Thank you for talking so enthusiastically about what's going on in West Midlands. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's so much ambition and so much that we want to do to improve transport, and people are impatient for change. David, you're still relatively new in your role. What's been the biggest challenge from your point of view from turning that integration ambition from strategy into delivery?
If I can be quite blunt, it's purely down to the finances and the funding settlement that we as a non-core city region is what they used to be classed as, so Liverpool, Greater Manchester, everywhere else, got that really big lump sum of transport settlement, and a lot of them were born out of a previously transport authority like you see in West Yorkshire. We weren't either of those, so we didn't get the large funding settlement and we weren't a transport authority. So we frankly didn't have the experience, we didn't have a local transport plan bringing both areas together, and we didn't have that full transport settlement. And we're quite restrictive, so we do get quite a lot of funding for road maintenance and road improvements, which is incredibly important for our region, which is an incredibly large area. But that everyday revenue funding to be able to develop our bus network, for example, and the funding restraints we have, I can't touch rail. Now, last time I checked, rail was a major part of transport, so I can do work in and around the stations, like we see at York Station, which we do at the minute, but in terms of putting more trains on the lines, I still have to go to central government to ask for that. So we're pushing hard at the minute for half-hourly trains between York and Scarborough. I think this is kind of real stark interest to where we are. So the work that these two guys are talking about in terms of spending hundreds of millions and billions of pounds on a ferry across the Mersey and mass transit and franchising, we are literally talking about putting, instead of having one train an hour, I'd like 2 trains an hour. But that's kind of the base we're starting at. We've got to get those foundations right. But we are really tightly constrained around our funding settlement. So where I do have power and funding, we're investing loads into active travel because that's where we can really shift the dial and we can really make big improvements there. We are pressing hard in around some of our larger rail projects. So the site at York Central is one of the biggest brownfield development sites in Western Europe. The whole connectivity of that site is going to absolutely explode the East Coast main line. So we're doing a huge amount of work there, but outside of that, we're still either having to go back to government to ask for further funding or ask for them to make decisions on an area that I'm control of. And when we're talking about devolution in devolved powers, I should be making those decisions for my area and I should have the funding because transport is the thing that unlocks everything. I've been really fortunate to spend a lot of time with Steve and Andy and Tracy and other mayors, and I've been able to learn, a huge amount from them. And we say time and time again, transport is the thing that unlocks everything. Your economic growth, your opportunities, your house building, everything. Transport's got to be there. And I think currently we're still looking at the way around and going, that transport in its own right isn't going to create a great financial return. No, it's not. But what that can do for unlocking all that housing development, all that economic growth, all those opportunities for people to access skills, that's what transport can do. So we need that funding settlement to be able to reach the potential that our area has.
That's great. And you're really busy, aren't you, preparing your strategy, your local transport plan to help hopefully make that case.
Exactly that. And it's more than just bolting York and North Yorkshire together. A great strength of York and North Yorkshire is we're part of that wider Yorkshire piece. So the strength of our bid into Northern Powerhouse Rail was working closely with Oliver and Tracy, the South and West Yorkshire mayors, but then linking up with Andy and Steve particularly on that Pennines connectivity as well, and connecting the whole of the north. We are a major part of that because of the size of the place and our ability to link up the wider Yorkshire piece. But that east to west connectivity, I think we will say a lot in my patch that connectivity York to south and from the north to south isn't too bad. I think 2 hours from York to London is pretty good, and 2 hours up to Edinburgh, that's pretty good. It's east to west that's shocking. East to west connectivity from York to the coast, say we've got hourly trains, and 25% of those trains are either cancelled or delayed. So it's not a great service. And heading over the Pennines, over to this side, again, that connectivity, the time and all that is shocking. And we've got to work much stronger connecting the north, which is where Northern Powerhouse Rail and us Northern Mayors coming together to improve that connectivity in the north. Because if we want to see the growth, the ambition, the house building, all this that government wants to see, it's going to happen in the north. It's as simple as that. That's where we have the space and the capacity, but we need the transport and the funding and the joined-up approach that I don't get left behind, because Steve, Andy, Tracy and Oliver and others have huge transport centres where they can fly on, and we're kind of coming up behind doing great work on active travel but can't really shift the dial on that bigger stuff as well.
That's great. So it'd be great to hear a bit more about Liverpool's current priorities and which areas you're really focusing on.
Well, just to address the point that David's making, he's absolutely right, by the way. I mean, there's no way that devolution means that because we've got it, we pull the drawbridge up and then other areas are left behind. That's the whole problem with the asymmetric way in which devolution is being rolled out. And I think that David should get an integrated pot for transport. And then you can do some of the great things that you need to do in your own area, because there's only ourselves who can do that. I mean, we've been waiting literally for decades and generations in the Liverpool City region for a benevolent government to come and help us, and nobody ever has. And that's why you see creaking infrastructure right the way across the board, not just in public transport, but right the way across the piece. So devolution is our opportunity to shape our own destinies. And one of the things that it's really difficult to explain outside, and I'm sure there'll be lots of planners in this room today, is about developing those strategies, because we find ourselves all the time in the chicken and egg situation where there's, yes, we want more money, but actually you've got to put some pre-development funding in so that you can develop the plans to get the projects, so that you've got the pipeline which then you can get the money for. And I've never knocked on a door anywhere in this country and somebody said, you know what, I think I'll vote for you because your strategy is brilliant on transport. But if we don't have one, you can't progress things. And so that's the dichotomy that we face all the time. We're putting tens of millions of pounds into something that the public don't see any benefit from. But if we don't have it, we can't attract national funding. And so we get on and do it, and we've been demonstrably successful in this, as I say, not just with the new trains, with the buses, with the brand new ferry being built on the banks of the River Mersey for the first time in 60 years, with the rapid transit system that we want to develop, but also with trying to encourage people to use public transport, and then electric scooters or bikes for the last 1 mile of the journey or whatever it might be. But we're doing all of this. And again, Sandy talked about spatial development. Try and explain that to the electorate. We need a spatial development strategy. And we're 7 years into developing ours, so I know the pain that it takes to get through this process. But we need that, because if we're going to build homes as we are in large numbers, one area called North Docks, we could be talking between 3,000 and 10,000 homes. Well, we need to include public transport within those plans, those proposals at the early stage. And what we've done very poorly in this country is we've worked in silos, especially in Westminster, Department for Transport, Department for Education, MHCLG. And we're able to cut across that as mayors because we can do things more coordinated in our areas. So it does mean, for instance, with those 3,000 to 10,000 homes, if they get the funding, as it's likely, because we've got 700 million plus for housing, for affordable housing, so we'll probably do those schemes. And we're getting powers to a mayoral development corporation, so I'll have the responsibility for the planning around this, but we could build a new station. We could take the rapid transit vehicles to these new communities, because what we want to do is to encourage them not to use the car all the time as the first alternative, but that to be a last alternative, because public transport should be so good that you use it in everyday life. And for me, my epiphany, if you like, was when I was a Member of Parliament and I came out of the House of Commons, and before all of the road was changed because of the security barriers, I used to turn left, and just on the main road was a bus stop, and at that bus stop there were the ladies, and they were ladies, in the tea room who served us. There were lords and ladies in the second chamber. There were MPs. There were people who'd been working on a building. Everybody just mingling, waiting for a bus. And back in Liverpool, this is 17 years ago, back in Liverpool, you'd never ever see that sort of degree of social mixing. And the reason that it was like that is because even if they'd missed a bus, in about 2 or 3 minutes time, maybe 5 minutes time, another bus would be coming along. And back for us, sometimes it's an hour between buses, you know, and sometimes, yes, sometimes you're lucky if it's even an hour. So that's why public transport is so important to us. And you don't even have a timetable now for the tube in London, because you miss one and there's another one. And I've got to shoot off in a quarter of an hour to get to Downing Street, so I've got to use all of the public transport. But the reason I'm saying this is that London was the one area that wasn't deregulated. They had a regulated system. And they had a regulated system because I'm told that Thatcher said it would cause chaos in the capital. But it was all right for all of us, wasn't it? Well, no, it's not, because we're not second-class citizens, and I'm not having a second-class public transport system in my city region. And that's why our trains, we bought them. We could have gone through a train leasing company. We bought them because we want that public buy-in. And on our trains, it's got owned by you. We've just bought 128 electric buses, and we're going to have owned by you. And we want the public transport to be something that people are proud to use. That, you know, that civic pride to return to a system where we have the same livery, so you know that that's peculiar to the Liverpool City region. And so we've got yellow buses and yellow trains and all that sort of stuff. It's a better yellow than Manchester's, I have to say, just to let you know. But all of that, I think, starts to give you an identity of this is a place where people have had something invested in them and for them.
It's so powerful, isn't it? And just seeing the yellow buses, you know, driving around Manchester with a B on the side, everyone knows that's a single integrated system now, and that's so powerful.
Just to let you know, because I'm in the home of Mr. Burnham here. So they've got the B network, which is the worker bee, the Manchester worker bee, and Andy is really pissed off with me because I've told him that we're calling ours the A network.
I don't think he's in the room. I'll let you two fight that one out. Sandeep, you've got some amazing strategies and plans. What are the big challenges you're facing turning those into reality?
First of all, it doesn't involve a letter, and it's not about yellow. So, but I think, you know, absolutely, we've got really good strategies around us, and as Steve has said, you know, these have to be the backbone. But how do we communicate these in a way that make them real for the people that need to use the system? So our latest local transport plan has an ambition to have 50% of journeys by sustainable modes by 2035. We're at about 35% at the moment, but that's a big shift that we need to see. So what needs to underpin that? Yes, there's the investment in infrastructure that we talk about, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that both Steve and David have said, because they are so important. The whole thing around transport being seen as an enabler for a lot of the things that need to happen has got to be fundamental to that. It is the foundation for some of the things that happen around housing, commercial growth, regeneration. But do we have the right systems and processes in place to do that? And there's many of you in this room that will talk about WebTag and Treasury Green Book guidance, but are they stacked in the favour of doing these things in the way that we need them to work? Thinking about where those housing sites are going to be and developing the transport infrastructure first. It's quite difficult to build a business cases around that if we stick to the current rules. There's the whole backdrop around the simplicity of a system. So we talk about getting to this this target and the strategy focuses on a target. But in terms of the end users, what do they see? And I don't want to get into names of networks and colors, but how does the network become easily identifiable to people? Because, as has been pointed out, we've come from a backdrop of a deregulated, fragmented transport system for many, many years. And people do look at London as the panacea, but London has been the anomaly for a long time compared to the rest of the country. But how do we make it look and feel like one system when ultimately it isn't? There is lots of different operators, a very fragmented system of public transport, and we're now trying to put the right layer of information, branding, simplicity across something that is very complex behind the scenes to make sure it can become the mode of choice, or the public transport system is what people want to use rather than the thing of last resort when they can't use a private car. So we need to keep on focusing on how we build that integrated system to support the strategy, have the right investment, but to keep it as simple as possible for the end users as well. That's what people see. I liken it, and I know Amazon are probably in the room as well, that sort of Amazon of transport. You want it, you don't have to think too much about it. You've got the right ticket, the right information to enable you to make your journey in the way that you need to make it. The end users are not really that bothered about the complexity that sits below the surface, and that's what we need to try and get to. I just want to touch on one more thing around how do we turn the strategies into reality, and I'll come back to this point around capacity and capability. And there's loads of transport professionals in this room today, but we need more and more people coming into the sector to be able to do the new things that we need to do. So how do we continue to build the capacity and capability, not just to build the systems that we want, but to operate them as well going forwards in an integrated way?
Steve, did you want to come back in?
I did, yeah, because it's not like us really as representatives of our areas not to talk about full accessibility as well, because in TFN, Transport for the North, we're pretty obsessed about this, aren't we? And that's because I've targeted the end of this decade to have a fully integrated and accessible public transport system in the Liverpool City region, and we're miles ahead of anywhere else. Our stations, 82% of our stations are fully accessible, so they've got lifts or ramps. Our trains, when we bought the trains, we bought them with this in mind, and so our trains have got level board, and so as the train comes into the platform, there's no mind the step or the gap. Literally a little plate comes out, and so anybody in a wheelchair or anybody with a pram or a pushchair can get straight on. There are dedicated spaces within the train carriages for people who are wheelchair users. On the new buses that were bought, sometimes bus drivers were telling us that they were left with a sort of Damocles decision of whether to let somebody in a wheelchair on the bus or somebody with a pushchair on the bus with a young child. And so we've got 2 separate spaces, but you could fit 4, if necessary, into those spaces, because we need to ensure that public transport is accessible to all. And there are people who are marginalised in our communities who feel isolated because they can't jump on a bus or on a train, or if they get on a train and even at a station that's fully accessible, they don't know at the end of their journey whether the station that they're going to is accessible. Yep. So this should be an aim of everybody here, all the planners, all the politicians, all the funders, everybody, that we make everything fully accessible. And not just that, we need to build in things like neurodivergence and the diversity around that. So we've designed, for instance, the stations that we've built, and we're building more stations, where it's a pretty clear palette and it's not overly busy, because people feel as if then they can get round, and wayfinders and lines on the floor with the different colours of ways to go in stations. These are not add-ons, and actually they're not really expensive things to do if you build them in at the very start. But we have to try to ensure that we can facilitate people to get around a good public transport system, no matter what their needs
it has to be consistent, doesn't it? And people have to know that it's going to be there when, as you say, because it can leave people really stranded otherwise. It'd be really interesting to hear about integration accessibility from your point of view. And huge geography, York and North Yorkshire, 2 national parks, very diverse, very sparsely populated in a lot of areas. Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about some of those challenges, David.
Yeah, and just on one of those points that Steve just raised there, especially around stations, that's enough opportunity where we can have that funding devolved, particularly for our stations. So the access for all funding that goes on these stations, again, that's not devolved to Compound Authority. So we've got Thirsk station in North Yorkshire, which is the only station in Yorkshire that's actually getting that funding to improve the accessibility of that station, because it is absolutely appalling, that station. But again, we've got a plethora of stations that really need that investment. Again, that's something that as regional mayors, with our local transport plans, with the investment we're doing, having that funding devolved as well, we could really crack on with that, rather than it kind of just being on a waiting list of just all these stations that need doing, and at some point yours will get done. I know that I'd say probably all our stations are quite frankly really poor, but having that ability to be able to invest in those and get those up to scratch now, so they do work for everyone. You know, we in York and North Yorkshire do have an ageing population, but we also have a lower than average young person, and we know a lot of young people are not choosing to drive or not driving, so the increased number of people not driving under 25 is increasing, and we have an ageing population, so a lot of our older population aren't driving either. So the access to an integrated transport system from A to B has to work for everyone, because if it's not, you will not use it and you will just rely on the car. And we need to move away from the first point of call, as been touched on, as the car. Yes, in rural parts of North Yorkshire, and we do talk about the weekly bus. Some of our villages literally get a bus a week. You know, some areas it's very stark like that, particularly when you start going to the moors and the dales. But there's definitely improvements you can make, and we need to move people away from the first point of call being the car and actually looking at those alternative modes of transport. If you know that you've got 2 or 3 buses coming a day, in some of our region, people plan their day around that, and that's absolutely fine. But the reliability of that bin there has to be there, and it has to be joined up with the wider network. So a real good example that we have is in Selby. We have a lot of people who commute from Selby into York because of the lack of affordable homes, or the value of house pricing in York means a lot of people have to move further and further afield, which we've got a big emphasis on building 100% affordable and social homes with the money that I have to really change that problem that we have. But we know people are having to travel further into York, which is the main epicentre where people are going to be work, and then having that onward journey. But the train connectivity does not align to the bus. So the last train gets in, but then that last bus leaves 10 minutes before the train gets into Selby. So if you're relying on that, say if you're working in the NHS and you're working in York and you work in the hospital and you get the last train back to Selby and then you need your onward journey, your bus is not there, you're just not going to do it. So you're just going to use the car. And I completely get why people use the car, because there's no alternative. It's making sure that's aligned, and that's where, again, coming into our spatial strategy, which, Steve, it scares the life out of me. It's taken you 7 years to get there, because we're just starting ours. But the fact that will incorporate all that. So look where our development's coming, where our business growth's going to come, where our housing settlement's going to come, and how transport unlocks all that and plays the part. So if you're living in Selby and it's only 8 or 9 miles into York, how that train and that bus and that active travel provision are all aligned, so you don't have to use the car. Some people will, and that's absolutely fine, but it's not your first point of call, and that's where we're trying to move to. And it's certainly what we are doing, but it is going to take investment. But it's when you package up that whole piece to go, actually, our economic growth opportunity, house building, is over here. If we can build all that, transport unlocks it all, that's when you get that real value for return. And we've got to stop looking at transport as like a money-making thing. It's the thing that unlocks everything else, and making sure it is joined up. But in parts where we're talking about, there is never going to be 6 buses an hour that go to Arn or Raskelf or Helmsley. It's just not going to happen. But if the buses are coming, it's got to be reliable, and it's got to be joined up in the wider network. So we're looking at a piece of work now where we have a spoke and wheel effect. So our stations particularly come a wider transport hub. So what we're looking to do is, if you live in more the rural parts of our area, how you get people connected to Thirst Station, to Malton Station, to Seamer Station, so they become then the hub for those onward journeys into York and then the wider field, rather than having to go to out in the middle of nowhere and all the way to York or wherever it may be, how we can have those radiuses of 3 to 5 miles around those stations and they become a spoke and wheel. So then that's connected into Thirst, then that's connected into York, and then York goes on from there. So that's what we're developing now, and I think there's got real legs in that, because it makes the region feel smaller, which is what we're always trying to get over to people. Is North Yorkshire is ginormous. You do not appreciate how big it is until you spend some time there. It's absolutely huge, and so much part of it is very rural. 2 national parks, it is absolutely ginormous. So we have to make the place feel smaller, and that's improving that connectivity and having those spoken hubs so people can get to there and then their onward journeys from there.
Love that. That's a really helpful way of visualising, isn't it, with this sort of these nodes that people can access and integrate with other services. Do you need to go, Steve? Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Good to see you.
See you, brother.
Have a good trip to London.
I'm moving to the middle.
Yeah, Sandeep, come and huddle in. Sandeep, we've talked about some of the geographical challenges that you're facing in York and North Yorkshire. You maybe have a slightly different kind of set of geographical challenges around multiple urban centres and having to work across a number of different political geographies. Do you want to talk us through how you're approaching that from an integrated transport perspective?
Absolutely, and as I've already touched on, we have a large metropolitan area, 3 cities, 4 towns, different political mix, a significant interface with the areas outside in terms of our shire authorities as well, in terms of the trips that come through. So having to integrate across all of those things can be challenging, but I come back to this point around when people are travelling, they don't care about the boundaries that they cross when they're going from one local authority area into another. It's all got to be seamless. So do we focus enough on place as a function? So what is the place function? And what we've been focusing on now is a range of place portfolios, a number of corridors across the metropolitan area. So where have we got some natural economic geographies across places like Wolverhampton and Walsall? Where have we got other corridors that go from the city centre through some very deprived parts of East Birmingham and out to North Solihull and the airport? We've got investment zones in areas around Coventry. So how, again, what are these geographical corridors doing? So using those as a basis for joining up some of those conversations around infrastructure at that broadest level, so not just the transport infrastructure, but going back to that point around what is the spatial plan for these areas. And Steve's gone now, so we can talk about why it's taken 7 years. But it's important to think about that alignment of housing, transport, where the job creation is happening in the right way, to make sure all these things are being done as part of the system and not individually. So we're using a lot of that as part of the Regional Investment Summit that was held in Birmingham in October. We produced our own regional investment prospectus, which really focused on those place portfolios and how we're joining up all the different types of infrastructure that need to happen across the region. And that starts to take another level, or take a layer above the geographical mix of 7 local authorities into these the spatial corridors that are really important. And if we're serious about meeting our objectives and outcomes, we need to work at that sort of level to get into it. The other bit I think is really important here will be around the role of bus franchising in terms of joining up across the region in a way which is not focused on some of the areas as it currently is, but taking a more balanced view around what is the right network that the region needs going forwards. But also things that we're doing like a potential mayoral development corporation around East Birmingham and the joining up of planning and delivery in a way that probably hasn't been done before, again, to move us away from some of the fragmented nature of lots of local authorities, lots of private sector partners and businesses, but using some of those vehicles then to move in one direction around that.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got a few minutes left before we sort of bring the session to a close. We've touched on funding a few times today, but I'd be really keen to kind of get your thoughts around the challenge and opportunity around more devolved funding. And actually, and maybe start with you, Sandeep, because you have integrated settlements now. How is that changing the way that you're working and prioritising your delivery programmes? It'd be great to hear a bit more about that.
And it's a shame Steve's gone, because I think the whole point around having that pipeline is so important. And we often get fixated on 5-year funding windows because that's how the funding comes. But the harsh reality is transport delivery does not happen in neat 5-year funding blocks. And we also need to think that we've got a local growth plan, an LTP that looks out 10, 15 years into the future. So we can't have this cliff edge of investment. So there is this thing around integrated settlement. Yes, that helps us with that overall plan for capital. But how we do developing that pipeline using the right development funding and the resources to make sure we've got a pipeline that goes on 10, 15 years outside of the current capital funding periods. So I mentioned earlier, we've just done a lot of work on what our future investment pipeline will look like. And we're taking quite a different approach in terms of how we have a pipeline that reflects maturity, but also means that we're not just taking the most mature schemes forward. There could be schemes that are quite immature at this point in time, but they are equally important in terms of that longer term investment. So how are we aligning the right levels of development funding to make sure those schemes can mature and be delivered? It may not be in this 5-year period, but the period immediately after. So there's a big push around development funding. Now, a lot of that will come as part of revenue funding that will sit alongside Transport for City Regions funding. But again, it's trying to get us into a more strategic space with that revenue funding. So it is pushing against the capital investment that needs to follow, and it isn't being spent on lots of other things, which are just as important, I get that, but getting the balance right to make sure that pipeline can be developed over a longer period of time, and people can see what's coming beyond the next 5 years. Some of these things we all know, mass rapid transit can take a number of years to develop and deliver. So how do we make sure we're giving those plans the best start by investing in that development funding early on? The other bit here, Nicola, which I think is important for us as well, is whilst there are lots of big plans around investment, is making sure that the systems and processes we have are agile and lean to make that investment decisions happen quickly. So whilst we have assurance processes and everything else, this is public money at the end of the day, and we need to show we're doing the right things, is making sure the access to funding is there to help push on those priority developments. So I'd have to bring football into it, always do, but the sports-based economy is growing massively. In Birmingham, we have a number of teams. We've got the redevelopment of Birmingham City Football Club and the Sports Quarter. Those are all big priorities that are levering massive amounts of private sector investment. How do we show the public sector can be just as agile in moving some of those funding decisions along to give confidence to our private sector investors to also make their funding contributions in the right way? And again, we're being able to move things on by getting some big decisions taken through our combined authority board to make sure some of that initial funding for development of those major programs is there and available to use.
That's where having those clear plans in place helps you potentially to leverage those other funding sources. You're obviously lobbying hard around funding. What's the thing that would make the biggest difference to you?
Excellent point you raised there. One of the first things that all combined authorities were asked to do when the new government came in last year was to develop a 10-year growth plan. And that was to identify our core growth sectors and how we're going to develop it over the next 10 years. We've also got a 10-year housing plan, so we know we've got to build 60,000 homes over the next 10 years. But until this year, our transport funding settlements have been 1-year blocks. It's incredible. It's now impossible to develop a new bus strategy or invest in new routes if you don't know what funding is going to be next year. And it's the same if we're looking to develop a station, for example, or an active travel scheme and develop that. You need that longer term settlement. So now we've got a 4-year settlement, which is one huge tick. But as is touched on there, our growth plan, our housing strategy, everything else is 10 years and on. So we need to know what that long-term settlement, so it can align, because if we're going to build the homes and grow the economy and get people the access to the skills and opportunities in our patch and outside of our borders. A big part of what we do is actually moving people in and out of York and North Yorkshire borders on a daily basis. We need that long-term funding settlement to align with everything else. So when and it's something that was touched on by Steve, government has traditionally worked in very siloed departments. So housing, transport, skills, everything works like that. Whereas we as combined authorities, we have that strategy looking over everything. So we bring all the pieces together. So if we're identifying a new housing settlement in the middle of North Yorkshire, what's the transport connectivity? What's the skills opportunities? What might be the health provision that's needed around that? And how we can move it from there. So government are moving in that direction. That's where we are. But we also need the funding settlements to align to that as well. So if we're developing housing for 10 years, growth plan for 10 years, our adult skills strategy for 10 years, transport needs to mirror something so we can work at the same rate, so we can invest. And then if you know that investment is coming, as in we know that that housing site of 10,000 homes and a site is coming in over the next 10 years, that private investment will come along the back of it as well, because they've got the confidence that that's happening, and that's where you leverage in private investment, because we know there's not all the money in the world to go around, but it's where you need to leave that private investment as well, which is why having that 10-year plan and that pipeline of investable propositions coming forward is really important, but just making sure everything's aligned and everything has that overarching umbrella approach to it, rather than just things being siloed, and therefore funding also being siloed as well.
Fantastic. It's a huge opportunity, isn't it, as a combined authority to really look at where your priority places are and how you can bring those different funding sources together to make
and
the
it's
biggest
also
impact.
we've done quite a lot of work where we've been basically overlaying maps almost in York and North Yorkshire as to where the most deprived areas are, where the worst health outcomes are, where the worst access to skills are, where the worst access to opportunities are, all that. And it's always the same places, and they've always got the worst transport connectivity as well. And I've got responsibility for police and fire, as well as being the mayor. We're also going to be taking on more responsibility around health. I've also got to deliver on housing. I've also got to deliver on adult skills. But it's quite a lot we've got to do.
It's huge, yeah.
But when you lay it all over, it's the same areas.
Yeah.
And to really fundamentally make a difference to those people's lives in those areas, all those things have to come together, and that's how you're going to shift the dial on someone who doesn't have the opportunities that I've been very blessed to have. That's how you're going to make the difference. It's building the affordable homes, it's giving them the access to skills opportunities and learning, it's improving the health outcomes, it's improving their access to exercise and everything else, and transport is the thing that does it all. If you can bring that all together, that's where you're going to move the dial on the fundamental problems that we actually face for a very long time.
It is incredible, isn't it, how much transport
Always
cuts
the same
across
place,
all of
yeah,
these
exactly,
agendas. Yeah. Fantastic. Right, we're coming to the end of our session. Thank you everyone for sticking with us. I'm going to ask our final two panellists to just give us a view 10 years into the future. What if you've been successful in achieving all the things we've talked about today, what will that truly integrated transport system look like for your region? I don't know who wants to start. Sandeep, do you want to kick us off?
I think we've touched on a number of the things. So for me, it would be a reliable and affordable, a fully connected transport system. When we talk about fully connected, I mean both physically integrated as well as the things that sit around it, the brand, the information, the ticketing. Fully accessible. When we talk about accessible, and that's an absolute priority for us, Journeys for Everyone means journeys for absolutely everyone, where all the modes are working as one. That obviously means that we need to think about the role of rail and where rail reform takes us over the next few years. And every community can access jobs, homes and opportunity across the West Midlands. And we genuinely want to make the West Midlands the best place to live, work and visit.
Fantastic. Beautifully put. You've said that before, I think. David, over to you.
Well, I've got two kids who are 8 and 11, and in 10 years' time, I am not going to be their taxi. So it's fundamentally making sure that public transport and active travel is their first point of call. Currently, in so many of our communities, they have got no alternative. And it's making sure that their first point of call is walking, wheeling, cycling, bus and rail. And currently, so many areas does not have that. So making sure that first point of call, A to B, they can do that journey, and also safely. A lot of what we're working on, particularly around bus travel and active travel, is making it safe and feel safe for people as well. So a big push on that. We're making sure that that A to B journey can be done in a very sustainable and integrated way. They're not reliant on the car at first point of call. Because I'm not driving around all North Yorkshire with 2 children for the rest of my life. No chance.
That's fantastic. That's a brilliant benchmark, actually, isn't it, as a parent of 2 teenagers?
Start at home, yeah.
Not having to be able to be a taxi service for your kids. I think we can all use that in our day-to-day job as a benchmark of a great integrated transport system. Thank you so much to our panellists, to David Scaife, to Sandeep from Transport for West Midlands for joining us today, for Steve Rotherham, who hopefully is on his way to London to ask for some more powers and devolution. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the conference, and do come and have a chat. I'll be around for the whole day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.